We are now in the downtown Brooklyn section of the In Pursuit of Freedom walking tour.
That's right.
And we're currently in front of the Thomas and Harriet Trudell home.
That's right. This is one of our first existing structure that we're checking out here.
And as you can see, or I guess as you can't see, but as we could see by looking in the windows, it actually looks like it might not be existing for much longer.
Yeah.
It seems like what you can see is that right next to this home there's a massive construction lot, and you can also probably see that on the home a lot of the windows are busted. It's all gated up.
Yeah.
It's I mean, you know, I find it unfortunate because it's a cool, you know, it's a landmark. It's also just a cool looking old building. The tiles on the front are kind of interesting. But
part of our auxiliary research involved an Untapped Cities article that we can provide a link to in the description below. And that covered 10 different locations in both Brooklyn and Manhattan that were Underground Railroad sites. And there was more than a bit of controversy or argument over the way that the development project that covered this area handled the building both here and two other buildings nearby that were apparently originally connected by underground tunnels.
Right. You told me earlier that the building down there, which I now think is an Indigo Hotel, to this building, that there was or is a tunnel underneath the street, right?
But yeah, let's read what it says in the In Pursuit of Freedom text.
Yes. The Trudells were originally from Providence, Rhode Island, where they were active in abolitionist organizations. Thomas was a founding member of the Rhode Island Anti-Slavery Society. Harriet was treasurer of the Providence Ladies Anti-Slavery Society. The couple moved to Brooklyn sometime before 1840 and lived here between 1851 and 1863. They were close friends with Bostonian William Lloyd Garrison, who founded The Liberator, which was an abolitionist newspaper. Garrison stayed with the Trudells at their Brooklyn home in 1840.
Yeah. So in the Untapped Cities article, it references the idea that this would be turned into a museum. There's no date on the Untapped Cities article, but as you can see, it does not look like that is currently in the plans.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what, I don't know. Hopefully that is what's happening. It's unclear.
Yeah.
It also looks like it's in rough shape.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's continue walking along. Much like the Dumbo section, you can see that the period of time that has passed has changed the complexion of this particular area greatly.
Yeah.
Which is not uncommon in New York City. I think, though, of the three neighborhoods, we'll be visiting Brooklyn Heights in this cluster next, that area has managed to maintain, I guess, a good deal of what I believe it was like at that time.
Yeah. I feel like there might be more homes there now than there were at that time, but like the style maybe seems similar.
Well, it's kind of a question of, you know, people having a communal sense of what the identity of an area is, and, you know, having the money to fight off people that want to change that identity.
Right.
Okay. So we're gonna pop a left here in just a second.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Everybody really needs to get to that light.
They're not going to.
It's very important.
It's a Friday. People are cranky.
So we're turning onto Bridge Street here. And we don't have, I believe, there's not an exact address listed.
Right.
It was just known that the Gloucester family lived here.
Yes, so it says just south of Willoughby Avenue on Bridge Street in the old numbering system. Oh, there is an exact address, but it's not current. In the old numbering system stood 290 Bridge, the home of Reverend James Gloucester, his wife Elizabeth, and their children. James was the founder and pastor of Siloam Presbyterian Church, which stood nearby on Prince Street. Elizabeth was a brilliant businesswoman and the owner of Remsen House, which was an elegant boarding house in Brooklyn Heights. They were both active abolitionists and close friends of John Brown.
John Brown being of the Harper's Ferry raid, which was very famous and inciting and galvanizing at the time.
Right.
And I think a nice aspect of the Gloucesters that was highlighted by the In Pursuit of Freedom program was that Elizabeth was a businesswoman of considerable skill. And we'll have an opportunity to visit the location where her boarding house was in the Brooklyn Heights section too. But yeah, I forget what, I believe we are about to come up on an organization that they were instrumental in founding as well.
Yes. The American Freedmen's Friends Society?
Yeah. Which we don't have a building or an exact location for that either, just a general sense.
Right, it's just that it's generally in this area on the other side of Willoughby.
Yeah.
Long before the Metrotech complex was built, busy Myrtle Avenue consisted of shops and homes. The American Freedmen's Friends Society stood on this block between Bridge and Duffield Streets. It was the local branch of a multi-city organization led by local residents James and Elizabeth Gloucester, whose mission was to aid newly emancipated people after the Civil War. Here, people could find assistance in finding homes, jobs, and employment.
Yeah. I read that earlier this week, and given the current circumstances of the pandemic, I was struck by a thought that I don't know if I'd really had before, which was, the idea of emancipating slaves is a tremendous humanitarian disaster project, essentially. You have 3.9 million previously enslaved people that have been suppressed in their skills and given no real direction or ability to help themselves.
Yes.
And how did people back then help, and
Yeah.
I started looking into some articles, and there's another article I found that we can provide a link to as well from 2012 that took a look at that time, and it was a review of a book that had come out, and the book had claimed that 25% of the 3.9 million slaves either fell very sick or died.
Wow.
In that period of time. And you can think about efforts like these where, probably a Band-Aid on just a gash, like just a wound that was bleeding without really any plan for how to handle this sort of thing.
Did it explain why that was happening?
Did it explain why that was happening? In the article, only in the barest sense of they just didn't have, there was the completion of a war.
Okay.
Both sides were depleted and probably didn't have the infrastructure, the resources, or the will necessary
For healthcare.
for handling that in any meaningful
Right.
way.
Okay.
And so, there were instances of people that were slaves having to stay in the same quarters where they were enslaved because there were no other options.
Oh, wow.
And just basically living their lives in a state that was no better. And so it also made me think in a positive way about, we always mourn the degree of entitlements that we have in this country and how they're insufficient, and they are, and we can continue to improve them. But there is an infrastructure in place, and there is some sense that these sorts of things should happen. And a lot of the things back then were just people, benevolence organizations, as they were called. The idea that it's like, this is wrong, and we, the government not really having as strong of a role as it does now.
In providing care for people.
Yeah.
I mean, especially, we're specifically talking about things that have happened in New York City, and I think our city, although like you said, there's many things that they could still do better, there are quite a number of organizations now that are government run, in addition to mutual aid and churches and the equivalent of the benevolent societies,
right,
that are put in place now for people that need it.
Yeah.
But you're right, I mean, I guess you're right. This was probably a massive undertaking to help so many people find new skills, figure out how to live on their own, and have support.
And I think as a common theme, a area that we need to work on as a country, we focus on the idea that, like, yes, we abolished slavery and we fought over it and we proved definitively that was not okay. But then the immediate aftermath was itself a crisis, and we don't want to focus on that because it's painful and we didn't do as good a job as we probably could have. And it just clouds a happier narrative, and we don't want to contend with that.
Right, no, but I do think it's something to think about, because, and I don't think it is something I've really given much thought to until now either, honestly. But this idea of, like, abolishing slavery obviously was the right thing to do, having emancipation, but then what? Yeah, it's like, okay, now go out and do what?
Right.
Like, where do people go, and how do people live if you've spent your whole life up until that point being considered someone's property and housed and fed in a way that is obviously well below substandard, like not acceptable. And then you have this additional challenge of never having had to figure out so many things that, I mean, people now still have trouble figuring out, how to just, like, house yourself and feed
in an inherently hostile area,
Right.
People that are enslaved are in the South, unless they somehow fortunately manage to get to the North. And,
right. And just looking around and not knowing, like, what person wanted you to be free and what person didn't, and how are you going to be treated, and who's a safe person and who's not. Yeah.
So I just paused on this building here. This is our next stop, and it is a church, or it was a church. Now it belongs to NYU. Jesse's going to read about it now.
So this is the Bridge Street AWME Church.
Yeah.
This is one of Brooklyn's greatest church buildings. Built in 1847 as a Congregationalist church, it was purchased by the African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1854 and renamed Bridge Street African Wesleyan Methodist Church. The church assisted newly arrived fugitives from the South and offered refuge to Black New Yorkers fleeing Manhattan's draft riots in 1863. In 1938, the congregation moved to Bedford-Stuyvesant. Today, the building now serves as the student center of NYU Polytechnic.
Gorgeous building. I'd like to go in sometime. The pandemic prevents us from doing that right now.
Sure. Yeah, it is really gorgeous. And there's a placard in the front, too, showing, I guess probably saying a lot of what we just read.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You can see in front of us there's a tent set up with a spin class.
Okay, we've seen this a couple different places in the city, these Soul Cycle outdoor classes that look like they're in a National Guard tent or something, you know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. We've only seen a couple in action.
Yesterday they were all hooting and hollering together, like
Oh, wow.
the instructor would do a call and response thing.
That doesn't sound fun to me, but like I can imagine that some people would think that sounds fun.
Yeah. So we're approaching J Street now, and there's a trio of landmarks that we'll be hitting along here. Okay, so we're on J Street now, getting closer back to winding our way to the Dumbo area.
Yes.
And Jesse, do you want to read the first of our bullet points on this road?
Yeah, so it's the corner of Chapel and J Streets, which is just up here past this big church.
Mm-hmm.
Sylvanus Smith's home.
Yeah.
Pearl Street once ran through what is now the Concord Village Apartments between J Street and Brooklyn Bridge Boulevard. This busy residential street was once home to Sylvanus Smith, a hog driver and a prominent anti-slavery activist. Smith was one of the original land investors in Weeksville, the second largest Black community in pre-Civil War America, located in Brooklyn. He also served as a trustee for the African School, or Colored School number 1 in Brooklyn, and the Citizens Union Cemetery in Weeksville. His daughter, Susan Smith McKinney Stewart, was the first female African-American doctor in New York State, while her sister, Sarah Smith Tompkins Garnett, was an educator and women's suffrage activist.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if we'll get to this area or not within the Weeksville tour, but his daughter was also the head doctor at the old age home, if I recall correctly. So, you know, a lot of notoriety and prestige there, which is cool. And this church doesn't have anything to do with that, but it has been here quite some time.
Yeah.
And I believe it, from the plaque across the way, Pope John Paul II visited there, which was a point of pride for there.
Yeah.
But yeah, another investor in Weeksville. I'm really, it makes me intrigued to know how that whole investment system went down. It sounds exciting, like a really daring, exciting idea to try and forge your own community. And I imagine that all these people that were involved were pretty dynamic.
Sure. I mean, I think forging your own community is an exciting prospect no matter what, but it also sounds like this in particular was not only an exciting prospect, but also a pretty necessary one in order to live in a way that, was desired.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, a lot was on the line, which I guess in some ways can sound stressful in a negative way, but also, having that much pressure can sometimes be exciting and really make cool things happen.
Yeah. All right, so next location here.
So now we are we at J in Nassau now?
Yep.
Okay, so we are, in that case, at the Brooklyn African Woman Benevolent Society and African School.
Yeah.
And what we know about this here, in 1810, Peter Kroger, Benjamin Kroger, and Joseph Smith, all leaders of Brooklyn's free black community, established the Brooklyn African Woman Benevolent Society. It was a mutual aid organization that provided its members with financial support, especially for widows and orphans, and was named after John Woolman, the Quaker anti-slavery activist that we spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
This was also the site of the 1831 anti-colonization meeting, where black abolitionists rallied against efforts to send black communities to Africa, which was a popular idea in some white anti-slavery circles. Finally, the African School, originally founded at Peter Kroger's home on James Street, later moved to this location.
Yeah. So this is that you mentioned the idea of the recolonization or the movement of African Americans.
Colonization. It says, they were anti-colonization here. So I guess the other guy.
Yeah. That's something that'll come up again in Brooklyn Heights, and something that there seems to be both versions of that were xenophobic and racially motivated in a negative way, and as well as versions of that were, if I can understand it correctly, supported by African American communities and meant to, in fact, offer competition to the southern cotton production.
Oh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, that was something that was referenced in the Weeksville area.
Oh,
as well.
interesting.
Yeah. But it'll come up again in Brooklyn Heights. And we have one more stop here. I think I'm only going to go a couple more steps before we get into the zone of Dumbo noise.
Yeah. So what we're coming up upon is the corner of J and High Streets, which is where the African Methodist Church would have been.
Yeah.
In the early 1800s, Brooklyn's free black community worshipped with whites and Native Americans at Sands Street Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Founded in 1794, it was Brooklyn's oldest Methodist church. But black Brooklynites left after being charged admission to sit in a segregated rear upper gallery and having to listen to pro-slavery sermons. In 1816, Richard Allen and others founded the independent African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. 2 years later, black Brooklynites raised enough money to build their own AME church, which once stood at this location.
Yeah. So right there, High Street and J Street.
Right.
And that was what I referenced earlier when we were concluding the Dumbo section, was the Sand Street Methodist Church that was charging admission and making people sit in the upper deck. And yeah, it's just insane.
Yeah.
But also it sounds like that was motivating to start something different. So.
Yeah, I mean, which I don't know. I obviously, with this kind of thing, it's like, it's hard to, whatever your first instinct is, isn't always really reflective of how things play out. But on one hand, it's like, wow, it's awesome that the community of African American people that were involved in that church were able to start their own church. Like, that's my first instinct. But then I also think, like, they never should have had to. Like,
right.
you know, we like to think that Brooklyn was always so anti-slavery and also anti-segregation, but it's clear that that wasn't the case with stories like this.
Yeah.
And especially just in a church setting, it feels particularly disgusting when, you know, to have to be preaching anything that is dehumanizing.
Yeah, I agree. And I just can't imagine going to a church and having to listen to people justify the idea that people that have the same skin color as you should be enslaved and not in control of their own lives.
I can't imagine going to church and hearing that people of anyone should be enslaved. Yeah. I mean, what you're saying, of course, it would be traumatic.
But I mean, what I'm saying is that the justification for that is as arbitrary as skin color.
Yeah. No, exactly. It's crazy.
Okay, so we have one more location in this cluster, which is the Brooklyn Heights area, and we're going to go there now.
Okay.